This is January 9th, 2019, City of Woodland Park City Council and DDA joint work session.
That's the water. Yeah, that's what's good. Let it go.
I don't get it.
You don't get it?
That's the camera.
I was gonna say, you're sharper than that.
It doesn't work. I mean, okay.
Oh, that's Kelly. Wow. Can you turn us down a little?
Suzanne?
Trying to figure out what that noise was.
It's me.
Listen to how loud that.
She's got batteries.
I'm number 8.
You're number 8?
I am.
Get your cell phones away from these.
Well, I'm kind of loud too. Who's it? What number are you? 1.
That's,
Is that better?
Right.
that's better.
That's better. Anyone else need to be turned down?
You got feedback. Didn't turn on. Number 4.
That's silly.
How are you?
I just muted.
What's that? There's still one.
Okay. It's a Sunday. Well, I would have had a little bit about it. Well, I'm ready to get tomorrow. Afternoon. Okay. You gotta go?
Just a little bit.
That's better.
Oh, yes, you got it.
That's a lot better.
Yeah.
Sounds good? Everybody can hear?
Can everybody in the audience hear us munching away on our food?
Okay, welcome everybody. We'll call this meeting to order. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, start again. Well, welcome everybody. A couple things before we start. I'm going to try today, because clearly this won't be our last meeting. I'm going to shoot for about 90 minutes. I know we said 2 hours, but we're going to shoot for 90 minutes, and that's going to kind of be my goal. Knowing, of course, that we're going to have subsequent meetings as we move forward. And moving forward is going to be kind of the theme for the day. And I think everybody knows what the goal is here and working together and all the things that we've talked about. So I'm not going to dwell on that at this point. I would ask everybody to, check their egos at the door and be good listeners. And we just want to get a bunch of great ideas and learn from people in an effort to move forward on any number of issues. So if we can have that approach, I promise we're going to have some success. That said, I've got a request from a couple of people that this be televised. We kind of decided early on that it wouldn't be, but we're videoing it today and with audio, and we'll download it and put it on YouTube tomorrow. Does this group have a sense? Would you like to see it broadcast live after today? We're not going to do it today. After today, or do you think will this suffice for everybody? Any thoughts on that? Then we'll go this route. It saves us some money. We don't need anybody to man it and those kinds of things. So if this is okay, we'll go that route. If anyone wants to change, then we will do what makes sense. To start tonight, I've asked Al Bourne to, obviously he's going to be here anyway, but Al was back probably as far as anybody in this group relative to DDA. And so I'm asking Val to give us about a 10-minute history, just so we're kind of all on the same page. Some of us have been around a long time, and some have not. And so, Al, we appreciate your time, and you have the floor, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yes, that which I'm going to mention tonight or reflect on a little bit really spans quite a few decades. And it really reflects back to when the town was much younger, much different than what it is today, and how some of the things that occurred then really have a major impact on what we're doing today. So history is important in that part, at least to know what it's about. Part of it may be perceived as a fairy tale, but most of it is not. I hope it is not a bedtime story, so I'm going to be watching everybody to make sure. I had to write it because I can't remember this number of words in any one setting. So I had to write it, so that's how I'm going to present it more as a read of a narrative and go from there. So here we go. Once upon a time, in the land of green trees, blue skies, and sunshine, a time of fair maidens and handsome princesses, a time when all the fire-breathing dragons which lived in the dark forest had been slain by the brave, handsome prince. A peace fell upon the land. The population of the village all recognized that their area was a very delightful area to live and raise families. The established businesses wanted to cause their businesses to grow by getting more people into their establishments, increasing the local population as well as enticing people to stop while traveling on the main trail through the village. The smart people of the village recognized that there was not enough water to supply the needs of the village as it continues to grow. The Board of Trustees of the town worked and negotiated and obtained a share of a large amount of water being transported from a distant watershed. A very small number of the very small fire-breathing dragons thought it was too expensive and a waste of money. The residential and business population continued to grow, and the available water proved to be a very valuable asset. The very small fire-breathing dragons were then redirected to toasting marshmallows. In 1975, the Board of Trustees of the town decided to develop a governing procedure which allowed a more autonomous structure. The charter of the City of Woodland Park was established, which set the structure for future development. To reflect on that, historically we were a statutory town, and all of the things that occurred in the town had to comply with those statutes. By going to a home rule community, we stepped away from that and developed a lot of the principles and procedures that was unique to a home rule city and not part of a statutory town. The community continues to grow. Their desires, values, and expectations changed and expanded. On December 4th, 2001, the first meeting of the Woodland Park Downtown Development Authority convened. Their challenge, as directed by the Colorado state statute, was to cause the development and implementation of various projects which would enhance the many parameters of livability within our city. At the board's disposal was the ability to define a specific area of influence and to use a portion of the collected property tax revenue to promote specific projects within the defined area. Since 2001, many people have contributed their thoughts and expertise. A number of projects have been completed, each of which have benefited our community. Some land parcels, which were impossible to utilize without extensive expenditure of capital, have been made economically viable with the aid and direction of tax increment financing. The first significant project was the Dinosaur Resource Center. Along the way, Tractor Supply, Big O Tire, Gold Hill Theaters, Country Inn, Dollar Store, O'Reilly Auto Parts, now coming a automated car wash and coffee kiosk, increased housing within our community. All things that the business community and the residents here wanted. A very significant project is the utilization of the large parcel of land in the center of Woodland Park, commonly known as Woodland Station. The early part of the 2000s, a vision of a mixed-use retail and residential mini community was furthered. Design standards were developed. A number of developers promoted projects, developed beautiful pictures, and received time-limited exclusive rights to develop. But nothing happened to Woodland Station. Then a major recession set in, and the economic market was not conducive to capital expenditures to the development of a project like Woodland Station. Woodland Hardware did build their enlarged facility in Woodland Station, which provides enhanced services and products to our community. We are no longer a village, but an economically and culturally viable community. People just like us. Much needs yet to be done. Bumps in the road have been overcome. Mistakes have been made, and more will be made. But do not lose sight of the big picture and the various possibilities as we plan and go forward. One must cogitate. When is the private enterprise market, along with limited quasi-governmental involvement, sufficiently developed to make this project economically viable? Not knowing this answer creates a great deal of frustration, and that's our challenge and our goal. So beware. There will always be small, fire-breathing dragons along the way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time, and just to reiterate a couple of things you said. One, about kind of the big picture approach and for all of us. Clearly, and Al said it, lots of mistakes along the way from all of us, everybody in this room. And so we'll take responsibility from there. We will try to learn from our mistakes, but in these discussions and moving forward, let's try to stay on a positive note, and and knowing what we know now, we're going to do everything we can. And when I say we, it's going to be, from now on, it's going to be DDA and city. But when I'm speaking from the mayor's point of view, trust me on this, you're going to get every bit of support from the city that we can manage. And so that's going to be our initial approach. Of course, I don't have the final say in specifics, but I know that the DDA, the council as a whole, is very interested in the support of the DDA. So know that moving forward, and I think at least that'll be a good start. We kind of got away from that when some things happened over the past few years, but again, that's behind us. We move forward. So everybody's comments, please, relative to there instead of the rearview mirror. And again, I think we'll have a great discussion. Move forward with Tanner and he'll give us a brief. Is that right? Am I supposed to I don't think anybody knows the DDA finances better than Tanner. So quickly we'll go over DDA finances and then focus most of our efforts on the last slide. Go ahead, I'm sorry. You guys can move this. Oh.
That means I have to move, doesn't it?
You're good, I got you right.
Help her out. Give her a pull.
Mary
Pull
Jo,
a
they
chair
can
out from under me. Hold on, hold on.
Does anybody around the table need a copy before I share my portfolio?
What is that?
Yes.
If someone wants one.
Thank you.
Okay, so Al gets to tell colorful stories, and I have to report finance. Well, my report is not so entertaining. I think these finances were sent out as part of the packet for this meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Hopefully everyone's had a chance. Really, I have just 4 components to this: revenues, expenses, debt service, and TIF agreements. So beginning at the top of the report, you'll see the revenue section for the DDA. What's not shown is just a few years back. We have 2017's finances here, 2018's projected year-end. Those numbers aren't finalized yet. And then 2019's budget and some projections going forward. A few years, what's not on here, going back a few years, you would have seen revenues in the $200,000 range for some time. That was where the DDA was at with revenues. New projects have come online, values have begun to climb, and with that, DDA revenues increase. DDA's revenues are TIF revenues, tax increment financing revenues. TIF is created inside of a TIF area. In Woodland Park, that exists as the DDA district. There's a boundary map that we're going to look at later. All of the properties within that boundary pay some portion of their property tax revenues into the DDA special fund. Right now, it's approximately 30% of the property tax revenues of every property within the district. That's where these revenues come from. The total assessed value of the properties in the district is broken into 2 categories: a base amount and an increment amount. The increment value changes when anything inside of the district happens to affect property values that is not directly the result of a reassessment. So if someone improves property, if there's a change in use from commercial to residential or residential to commercial, things of that nature change the assessed value within the district, and that changes the increment value, which is the value that DDA's revenues are based on. So the DDA, from a finance standpoint, is motivated to see an increase in values within the district. More commercial uses than residential. And
Let's give an example.
okay, as an example, Dinosaur Museum is a great example. Previously to, prior to being the Dinosaur Resource Center, that property was church. It was tax exempt. It generated no property tax revenue. When converting use and being improved to the tune of several $1 million, it became a taxable property of a relatively high value, and so that assessed value, the new assessed value, is added to the district's increment value, and this is something the assessor tracks. The increment value generates revenues for the DDA, just like assessed value does for any taxing entity. The mills that are levied by all the taxing entities against that property are levied against the increment value, and the resulting revenues are paid into the DDA special fund, which is held at the City of Overland Park. So that's where these revenues come from. This year, we're projecting $608,225 in total revenue. In 2020, that number climbs somewhat. We are projecting that on January 1st this year, the assessor is adding approximately 75% of the value of the new microtel onto the tax rolls. The DDA will realize an increase in revenue from that. And a good portion of that revenue is to be reimbursed to the microtel pursuant to a reimbursement and redevelopment agreement. Nevertheless, the DDA will retain 25% of those new revenues. So that increases our revenue. Natural grocers will be coming online. And we're anticipating approximately $56,000 in tax increment revenue from that project. So as you look forward into future years, you'll see the revenues grow substantially in 2020, and then at a rate of approximately 1% per year after that. Moving down into expenses, you'll see all of the various expense accounts listed: salaries, benefits, pension, payroll tax, office supplies, beautification, etc. Again, if you could look back a few years, you would see significant salary, benefit, pension, and payroll tax expenses. Everything on this report in those four expense accounts is $0. I have no idea how long the DDA is going to operate without an executive director, or at what point those numbers may change. But for the time being, we don't employ executive staff, and there is no salary, benefit, pension, or payroll tax budget. That saved significant money. Everything else here, particularly in 2019, reflects a fairly minimal budget. $500 for office supplies. In 2019, $0 for office supplies, $3,500 for beautification, $100 for ads, publications, and other, $25,000 for contract, professional services, and attorney fees, $500 for IT, $500 for travel and training, county treasurer fees of $18,247, which is simply 3% of projected revenues. The county collects that fee. There's nothing we can do about it. A $75,000 loan payment to the city, $142,309 in total TIF reimbursements pursuant to reimbursement redevelopment agreements, $286,595 for 2012 series bond debt service, $5,000 in Woodland Station improvements, $64,997 in 2018 series bond debt service, for total expenditures of $621,748, with an ending fund balance of $24,757.72. So that's the 2019 budget. As you look forward into 2020 and future years, you'll see some projections, but don't read too much into that, as none of us know what the future holds, what projects may come, how values may be affected, what the priorities at the time will be, and how the DDA may choose to reallocate its resources to reflect those priorities. So that's it for revenues and expenditures, and also debt service. You can see there are essentially three line items for debt service. Two are highlighted: 2012 series bond debt, 2018 series bond debt. Those numbers are directly from Vector Bank's amortization schedules provided as part of the bond documents. The third one, which I did not highlight, is loan payment to city. And that is pursuant to a loan payment agreement negotiated between the board and the city council. It was approved, I think, 2 years ago. Any questions at this point?
Good dinner.
No fire-breathing dragons.
No. That was a good briefing. And as you spoke about TIF, because I think everyone in this room understands TIF, But for the public, as this is being recorded and put out, if the public wants to understand TIF a little better, please go to any of the business people that are fairly accessible in the town and ask them to explain TIF to you. It's complicated. We've struggled with it for 25 years, and by golly, I think we've got it. So if you want to know what it is, I encourage you to just ask. We'll be happy to tell you. So,
Okay.
anything to add to that? Then,
Well,
I'm
TIF
gonna do
agreements is on the list.
Right.
Okay.
So you got the TIF too. So the TIF agreements are going to be the TIF agreements that are already done, or is it?
Yeah, under the finance report. So
Okay.
on a separate page, I've listed the TIF agreements separately. And if you add up the TIF agreements that are budgeted in any given year, they will equal the amount in the corresponding expense account listed in the revenue and expenditure report. So it's just an itemization of where that expense comes from. This year, for 2019, this will be the final year for reimbursement to 3J Holdings, which is the Dinosaur Resource Center, TIF reimbursement agreement. K Brothers, which you'll know as Big O Tires, had a TIF reimbursement agreement. And that is, there's no longer any TIF being generated by that property and no reimbursement being paid. Jan's Rocky Mountain Fitness ended a couple of years ago. We have Gold Hill Square North and Gold Hill Theaters to receive TIF reimbursements. Woodland Park Associates LLC, which is Trail Ridge Apartments. HSC Woodland Park, or Tractor Supply. Eagle Fire Lodge. Purple Mountain Hospitality 2, which is the new microtel. And Taylor Mountain Enterprises, which won't begin until next year. These various agreements were entered into at various different times. They have various terms associated with them, and so the projected TIF reimbursement payments here are similar to revenues and expenses. They're really impossible to predict. They're based strictly upon the assessor's valuation of the property and the base amount of value that is defined in the agreement for each one of these properties. And then, of course, the taxes that result from the increment value that's calculated each and every year using those numbers and the percentage that is to be reimbursed. So that's where these numbers come from. All the documents that are related to these calculations are open public records. And if anyone has questions about how the calculations are done, when or where, or why or how, you can see me anytime. Just request copies of the contracts if you want. I can provide you with those and walk you through any of the math. Are there any questions?
No questions. Okay, thanks, Tanner. And just to reiterate what Tanner said, he's kind of the guru on these finances. So any questions anytime, he's always willing to be there for you. That said, we talked about TIF agreements for a minute. Back to the agenda, and we're down to the future of the DDA, and that's the nature of most of this discussion for the next 60 minutes or so. And we can start at the top. Did you want to talk about the disposition agreement now? Do you want to wait? What would you like to do in that regard?
I would like to talk about it right now. If that's good with everyone else, unless I thought.
Okay.
As the council liaison to the Downtown Development Authority Board of Directors, we have, as a DDA board, they have approved a second amendment to the agreement. I have submitted that to the staff, and I'll leave it with the board to discuss, but I feel, just from my perspective, and I've had a conversation with Councilmember LeVar and with staff, at this point, I think this agreement still needs to have further evaluation from counsel, counsel for the DDA and the new attorney that will be coming on board for the city council in the city of Woodland Park and its citizens. And so at this time, just from my perspective, it would be my recommendation that we do and discuss the agreement at this point and maybe discuss the terms in that agreement and what might be something that would be subject to negotiation. And I'll leave that with the chair and others on the board to expand on that from there.
And I would like to just put a little bit in, and I would like the rest of the board to put what they would call of this agreement. This agreement goes clear back to the purchase of the Woodland Park Saddle Club, of the property from the Woodland Park Saddle Club. Mm-hmm. So it goes back that far, and it's reached a point now where, again, we maybe need to make it serviceable for moving forward from today on. Mm-hmm. It's got some antiquated parts to it, some parts that don't really apply anymore. We'd really like to clean it up with everything else and make it easier for us to work together in making what we want to happen now happen. And this is a little bit cumbersome in some spots because this agreement was written when we all had dollar signs in our eyes and it was going to be a magical world here. Well, it didn't happen. So that's really what this is all about. Sure. Kelly can take you back through a lot of that because she was there when this was written up, so she understands from council perspective why that was put in at that time and probably why it doesn't serve us well now because it's time passed.
Well, I'll just reiterate some of the things that Al Bourne, Mr. Bourne brought to our attention in his lovely story, was that this occurred in 2009, was when the agreement was drafted, the disposition and development agreement. And it was during a time when one of those developments that you mentioned was on the table, and it was right before the recession hit. And so I think that the agreement was, and I remember, I was on staff at the time, that the agreement was written with that development plan in mind. And it's even referenced in the exhibit to the agreement. Things that we've been through a major recession and we've seen a lot of change. And so that would be one of the areas that I think needs to be revisited by both the DDA Board of Directors and the City Council in joint session as a negotiation to work together to revise this. And obviously we would need to have both of our council present to guide us because it is a legal document. And as Mary Jo said, things have changed, times have changed, and so it's time. We already addressed the timetable and the deadlines as a city council and extended one of those deadlines out in order to provide us an opportunity to reevaluate the agreement and bring it up to current times, if you will.
Can I do a real quick question, Kelly? I didn't understand what you said in response. Do you say you support it or no?
Support what?
The proposed contract amendment.
I am the council liaison bringing it forward to the council, and so I reserve my judgment as a city council person. I won't be able to support or deny it without being with the full council and sitting on that board. From a DDA perspective, I have chosen as the liaison to the DDA board not to vote as a DDA member because I reserve my vote as a city council person. But on behalf of the DDA, as the liaison to the council, I am bringing this forward as a document that the DDA approved yesterday. And I have provided to the city staff to the city attorney needs to review it, and then it comes forward to the city council.
Okay.
So I'm just suggesting, we have new council going to be coming on board. We, as a council, interviewed last night in a public session with candidates for the city attorney position. And with that, I think that affording that attorney the opportunity to advise the council would be a wise thing, in addition to the council of the DDA, with those boards participating. So that's my thought.
Couple of things, go ahead.
Thank you.
I just want the parameters set here. I didn't know we were gonna be voting on something. So.
We're not.
wait a minute. So
We're
this-
not.
This is just a presentation.
Information.
And information only.
Correct.
And as council, we will meet, we will have our legals and DDA meet, and so there's no problem there.
And that's the suggestion that I have
Go ahead.
as the liaison.
Darren.
The original amendment that City Council approved about 2 months ago, the intent of that was to move forward and look jointly with DDA to look at defining what the development agreement would describe. I mean, what would it clearly define that those development requirements. This amendment is a clear departure from that. It really releases any. I mean, it's not, and that's why I think why it needs to be evaluated by the city attorney. It's a little bit of a departure from any obligation from the city or the city itself to have any kind of future say, I guess, in the development of the property, Woodland Station. And that's the way it was. That's because our city attorney has reviewed it already, and that was
The existing attorney.
yeah, the current city attorney. So certainly it's a departure from what the initial extension of the development 2009 agreement was intended to be extended. So just throw that out there.
Okay, and I know Tanner wants to respond to that, but before we do, everybody at the table notified has seen the copy of the new agreement. I know DDA has because they approved it last night. For council,
Council has not because.
not council,
Okay.
DDA. For council, on next Thursday, it might be our first opportunity to chat about it, but we may wait until we have council there to even do that. And so one question for you, Tanner, is do we have a deadline relative to this agreement?
No.
Okay. Why don't you respond?
Well, aside from December of 2021,
Sure.
or the expiration of the DDA.
And a decision from council on this and DDA, if we can manage that in the next 60 days, we'll find it. Yes. It might take, I don't know how long before we actually have our city attorney. But hopefully in the next, 2 or 3 council meetings, we can get that done.
There's three things. If you could just describe the top 3 aspects of
I'd be happy to.
because there's really 3 key elements, 2 to 3 key elements of this agreement that would be the most, I guess, contentious aspect of the
Certainly.
agreement.
I'm happy to.
Sure.
The simple thing is really just a compliance thing with state statute and with the statute associated with the DDA and its operations. On the whereas at the top of page 2 of the current document, it talks about that to a developer or developers, excuse me, the parties have agreed that the DDA will transfer the property to a developer or developers for no cash consideration, but for fair value in the furtherance of the goals and objectives of the DDA, blah, blah, blah. And that is in what's the word I'm looking for? That doesn't comply with state law. That can't happen. And so that needs to be revised to make that agreeable with the law. So that's just housekeeping. The second of the 3 that you just mentioned, Darren, the second is paragraph 2.02 in the disposition purchase price. It provides for, as consideration for the conveyance of the property by the city to the DDA. The DDA does hereby pledge and promise to pay the city $2.75 million in aggregate amount of ad valorem property tax increment revenues, blah, blah, blah. And it gives some deadlines, and some payment terms that needs to be accomplished. The DDA is asking for that to be removed and basically removed. It says to permit the party, our amendment says to permit the parties to fairly consider redevelopment options that are in the best long-term interest of the central business district and the community at large. Section 2.02 of the amended agreement is hereby deleted. That's the first item. To go on, section 3.0.
Can I back up there while
Yes.
we're on that and everybody's thinking, so we're not gonna pay any of this back, that's not true. Some of that, isn't that, John, I believe, was on the DDA after he was on the council when that was put in. Was that?
Go ahead. The 2.75 is the Parkhurst debt.
Yes.
And
That's what I meant.
Kelly, if you
I was
want,
there.
I understand. That said, do you want to explain it?
Yes. When the DDA, when the city purchased the property, which was referred to as the Saddle Club property at that time, the city agreed to, and it was the city council, when I mention the city, I'm saying the city council. They agreed with the Saddle Club for the transaction to exchange the land known as the Lagoons and the Key Bank property, the 23 acres down there that the Saddle Club currently owns, for the 10 acres in the center of town, now referred to as Woodland Station, as an equal trade, plus the city agreed to pay $2 million for above grade improvements on that, which was the Saddle Club above grade. And so that transaction was done, the city paid the $2 million, and they traded deeds to the property, effectively. Then, when the DDA issued its first series of bonds that have been refinanced since, at that time, they used $2 million of those proceeds to repay the city for the $2 million they expended to purchase the property from the Saddle Club. Just as simple as that. And so that's what a portion of those proceeds in the initial debt from Vector Bank was used for, and other things. So at the time that this agreement was done, this was an agreement that was done, I would have to say, at the 19th hour. I think that's how we call it, is the 19th hour. And at the table, before the meeting, this was something that was done to satisfy George Parkhurst's demand that the city be reimbursed for the parcels, the 23 acres versus the 10 acres, and be compensated for that. And that's where this $2.75 million reimbursement came from. I believe you were on the board at the time as well, Al. If I'm remembering any of this erroneously, please interrupt me. And so that was done to get the deal done because we had an expiration date looming.
Go ahead to your item number 3.
So item number 3 is paragraph 3.0. And this refers to attachments that list Exhibit B, which talks about the development plan required of the DDA, which referred to the concept plan that was on the table at the time, that Mr. Bourne referred to at the time, that was prepared by a Matrix Design Group and called the conceptual site plan. And it was a development plan that included things such as commercial, office, entertainment, residential lodging, and event center facilities, and supporting infrastructure. And that was imposed upon the DDA to create that development plan by a date certain, which is another exhibit, which we just amended as a city council, which is Exhibit C. So that's what this section refers to, is that development plan, which in current time is unrealistic. The market doesn't support that kind of development and we don't have a crystal ball to look into the future. to see if that's really the right type of development for that property. Our community's desires and needs and wants have changed. In fact, we've heard a lot of talk just at our meeting this week about the Bert Bergstrom's dream and vision for the property, what he intended it to be used for, and different things that have come up with regards to the potential of maybe it's open space. So that development plan is no longer really relevant, and so the DDA is desirous of seeing that amended or eliminated. So this amendment calls for those sections 3.01, 304, and exhibits B and C to the amended agreement, require adherence to specific dates, blah, blah, blah. And this says that those are hereby deleted.
Okay.
And then we have one more.
Oh, one more.
That was number 2. The third section is section 4 of the contract, and section 4 refers to the right of reentry or reconveyance of the property. And this agreement as it stands provides the city the opportunity to re-enter and reconvey or reclaim the Woodland Station property that's the topic we've been discussing, and retake that. And the consideration that would be due to the DDA would be reimbursement of specific costs. Bear with me a minute.
I
don't think it does.
Existing agreement or the new agreement?
The existing agreement. I'm looking.
The city doesn't have to pay.
They have to pay us back some costs, but it's not necessarily the 2 million.
Right now, the right of reentry, which is what's being discussed, is a right retained by the city that in the event that the DDA is in default and has failed to cause adequate development of improvements of Woodland Station by a deadline, the city has the right to take back title and all rights and interests in the property from the authority and is then required to sell the land. And when they do, they're required to reimburse the authority based on certain terms, any actual out-of-pocket expenses for the improvements that have been installed, less the fair market value. The issue that we see with this is that it puts the taxpayer's investment at risk by putting the 2 parties, the city and the DDA, in very different positions relative to the property, different financial positions relative to disposition of the land. It's all taxpayer money, whether it's the city or the DDA choosing to sell the property. Taxpayers are paying for it. Right now, the taxpayers who are paying the bill are the property taxpayers inside the DDA district only. The residents of the city of Woodland Park and any property owner outside of the boundary is not funding the DDA. Their revenues are not included in that revenue line that we looked at in our finance report. Properties inside the boundary are paying for it. Those are taxpayers. Under this agreement, the city can choose to take the land from the DDA and sell it. And if that happened, say, tomorrow, would probably realize less than the appraised value of the property, which is approximately $1.1 million. Well, $2 million was paid for it. That's a net loss to the taxpayers. It's a liquidation of the property at a sale price far below its purchase price. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a decision that has real consequences and real considerations. It's not immaterial. And the DDA and the city are in 2 different positions with regard to making that decision. If the DDA makes the decision to sell the land tomorrow, and we can get $1 million for it, we've lost $1 million. But that's our decision. We represent the taxpayers paying for it. It would be reflected on our financial statement. It's a decision we would make with our eyes open, fully informed. Should the city make that decision under the current agreement, exercising its right of reentry, the city does not realize a loss of $1 million through their decision to sell the property. It's a much easier decision for the city to make. It doesn't cost them anything. They get to keep the revenues minus some very small portion reimbursed to the DDA, and the taxpayers within the boundaries of the DDA would be left paying the bill. That's a burden, a financial burden, on a select group of taxpayers. It's unfair when they're not in control of the asset that they bought. And so this amendment, as proposed, converts the city's right of reentry into a right to repurchase. The city would still have the right to take back the land and then sell it. But if they choose to do that and realize that loss should be on these city's books. It's a decision being made by the representatives on behalf of all the taxpayers within the city's boundaries. It should be paid for by those taxpayers.
So I found what I was looking for, apologies. It says that upon such resale of the property, the proceeds thereof shall be applied to reimburse the DDA up to an amount equal to any actual out-of-pocket costs and expenses incurred by it making any of the improvements, less the fair market value of the property, any gains or income withdrawn or made by the DDA from developer agreements, the property or the improvements, and any balance remaining after such reimbursement shall be retained by the city. So that's what the current agreement provides for, as far as sharing anything back to the DDA.
What was your concern? What was your concern with the new agreement?
My concern with the new agreement? Well, as a city council as a DDA board liaison and sitting on the board and listening, I hear and I understand, and with that hat on, agree with what Tanner has said and what the board has brought forward. But as a city council person, my interests in that role are for the citizenry as a whole. I'm elected by the citizens of Woodland Park to represent their best interests. And so I too have to balance that. And I understand the right of repurchase. It seems to be fair and equitable based upon what I described moments ago. And so as far as you can see my dilemma, I can understand both points of view, and at this point, I'm not ready to make a decision. I feel like there's a balance there. I was elected to represent the entire citizenry of the city of Woodland Park. However, the argument about where those revenues are coming from in this scenario, as Tanner just explained very well, is also consideration. Because those revenues that paid the $2 million did come out of the taxpayers that are within the boundaries of the DDA. So that's why it really requires some careful thought and consideration from my point of view. The right of reentry. And as far as the improvements clause, section 3, I'm okay with that, to the point that precludes the need for a disposition and development agreement if we don't have expectations for development. And so maybe a compromise might be, or part of a negotiation between the bodies might be a more flexible and reasonable improvement plan or development plan, or the attachment or exhibit to the agreement that really doesn't bind us to offices and hotels, and because the community needs to have an opportunity to tell us what they see that looking like. Maybe it's open space, maybe it's a park, maybe it's, as we saw yesterday in the DDA meeting, Mr. Schultz, was that his name? From the farmer's market? Yes, from the farmer's market. presented to us, they're very interested in partnering in some development over there with the DDA to provide them a home. Because they'd like to be more visible. And they see the pressure that our new park in Memorial Park is taking. And as a council, we saw we appropriated for money in 2019 to make some repairs that we've seen as a result of the pressure on the park. Wonderful. We couldn't have done anything better for our community. But the farmers market sees that and they see an opportunity to possibly be more effective in the center of town and visible from 24. So those opportunities need to be considered here. So whether or not that section 3.0 goes away or is made to be more flexible,